Hello, I'm Kevin Pope, and today I will be discussing with you the book Coolidge by Amity Shales. Now, we all know Calvin Coolidge as the 30th President of the United States who initially took over after the death of Warren Harding in August of 1923. But what we don't really tend to think about with Coolidge, aside from the fact that he was called Quiet Cal, and he was the guy who was in office right before Herbert Hoover came in with the Great Depression, is that Coolidge had a lot happening in his presidency at that time. And there were a couple of things I wanted to point out and talk about Coolidge to give somewhat of a fair course of history to him, but I really wanted to discuss some of the things that kind of lowered him, in my opinion. Things that, while I understand maybe his own personal reasons, I had to disagree with. So I think I'll start off first by talking about how Coolidge, in 1927, I believe it was, there was massive flooding across the nation, mainly located in the South at first. And the South got just wrecked. I mean, it was terrible flooding. And it was something that we really could have used the federal government to do, was to help them respond to that flooding. But Coolidge said no. Now, he did send the Red Cross and he did dispatch Hoover, but Coolidge expected the states to do most of the work. He really didn't want the federal government intervening that too much, and he wanted the states to pay for most of the actual repairs, which, if you're a state that has just been destroyed by flooding, isn't really going to be something that you can do. And the problem would be further expanded upon when, I think by the winter of 1927 or 26, I don't remember which year it was, the Red Cross reported that there were still 600,000 Southerners who needed winter clothing, who weren't ready for this upcoming winter, and had a lot of problems. And Coolidge said no, he wasn't going to get the federal government involved, he wasn't going to pay for it, and he stuck with that. And then in, I believe it was 27 now actually, there was really bad flooding in New England. And that flooding hit, in particular, his home state of Vermont very hard. It actually ended up killing the lieutenant governor, destroying bridges, and it was terrible. But Coolidge still refused to send in any aid. You know, on principle, sure, that may seem, oh, Coolidge, look at him, not sending any aid, even to his own people. When I think the appropriate situation would have been to send aid to both of them, to have the federal government help, and to be a presence. Now, he did dispatch Hoover once again, and he met with the governor of Vermont, Governor Weeks, I believe, but he didn't really do anything. I mean, he just kind of let him suffer, you know? And while I can admire a man for principle, I can't admire him when he stands by a principle that does actively let people get hurt. I just don't think that's right. And some of you may ask, well, why didn't Coolidge want to? Why didn't he want to help? Well, Coolidge was a small government Republican. He didn't think the federal government should really be involved. He'd actually been fighting with the Army, that he didn't want, the Army and the Navy, he didn't want to expand, he didn't want to give them new warships, and that is very interesting. He truly was small government. He'd been cutting down the budget. Yeah, I believe he'd got to almost $3 billion by the time he left office, as Shales points out in her book. But Coolidge let quite a few people suffer in his principles. And while I can commend him for his work with lowering the debt, lowering the deficit, his work in reducing the Army, and then I really like how he ended up trying to set up these treaties that would make war not a viable option between many nations. Now, I haven't entirely finished the history of that book, but just reading about how he went through that effort of trying to get all these countries to come together to sign pretty much what would be a massive non-aggression pact is commendable. But I think that Coolidge is arguably not the greatest president, but he is a C tier. And there's one other big mark against him I wanted to discuss, and that was the fact that it is believed, and it was reported by many who knew him at the time, including the Secret Service agent who was assigned to him, Colonel Sterling, that Coolidge saw an economic downturn coming. He saw something bad on the horizon, and he didn't do anything to stop it. Now again, principle, but he did nothing. He ignored it, and ultimately the Great Depression came not long after he left office. Now, Coolidge is just such an interesting figure. There's a lot I would love to get into, but I saw these points, I thought I'd love to discuss these. But I will leave you with this fact, is that for a time, Coolidge was the only living former president from 1929 to January of 1933, when he died at the age of 60 of a heart attack, I believe it was. And after that, there was no living former president until Hoover left office a few months later, so I thought I would leave you with that little fact.